We are now recording. So yeah, hello everyone. And as I say, today, we have Stuart here today, Stuart Webb, to talk about, is this really the job that I always wanted? Stuart has had a very diverse career. I was going to say he was a jack of all trades, and then I noticed that the other part of that is master of none, and that's definitely not the case for Stuart. But he has done several things, started off actually in medical research, and then went on to process flow. And in 2008, he started off as an independent consultant, and now he delivers leadership coaching, and etc. So today, we are really pleased to see that Stuart's here today, and he's going to tell us about, is this really the job I always wanted, and how to cope with job transition. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone, and hi to those of you who are watching on the recording. I'll try and keep it as interesting as I can so that you're this early on a Saturday morning, you're still entertained, I hope. I did say to Lindsay, if there are questions, please pop them into the comments box, and I'll ask her to monitor those, because I think if there are questions which crop up, we can deal with them as they go through. And so with that in mind, I'll start off by sort of asking her if she can monitor that, because I'm going to try and concentrate on what I'm saying and not trying to monitor too much what's going on in the comments box.
Sure.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work I've been doing, particularly with young managers, and the way in which they transition from a job which is about being part of a team and then moving into a management position. And it's something which was born out of my experience, and I'll come to that a little in a while. But I particularly interested in this because I've seen it happen so many times. We have young people that we think and people that we think could go into a management position. It's something they seriously want to do because they believe that management is where they get paid more and where it happens. So I want to ask the question, I want to pose the question, I'll pose it with this, that most of the people I work with, has this sort of happened to you? And the first thing I sort of ask them to sort of think about is they finish 1 week where they are the team, part of a team, thinking of themselves as part of that team. They go away, and their weekend, or maybe a week later, they either come back into the same company or into a new company, and they're now the manager. They're this important new role, and they're thinking to themselves, wow, I've made it at long last. And I think we saw it yesterday with something that Angela put on her presentation, which you climb the top of the ladder only to find out it's leaning against the wrong wall. You've now got the job that you thought you always wanted. What happens? Well, somehow the team, the people that you work with, the ones that you thought were your friends, they treat you differently. And that begins to sort of gnaw at you, and you think, well, I don't understand that. Only last week we were friends, or only a week or two ago we were doing this, but now they won't talk to me, and now they won't do this. And the reason is because silently, secretly written across your forehead is the words, I can fire you. And people forget that as a manager, they do have that opportunity, that particular pain, that sometimes that happens and it's part of their job. And people are very aware of it. And you know, that then starts to ask the question, they start to ask themselves the question, well, how do I motivate someone to work with me if they fear me and they fear the consequences of me of telling me the truth, and I just don't understand how to do it? And I think that then leads them to this, that's basically destroying their self-worth. They're no longer capable of doing this, no longer wanting to do this. And so as a result, you end up in a situation where this dream job that they so much wanted becomes the thing that destroys their own self-worth and leads them into a spiral of, I just didn't ever understand what I was taking on. So what are we going to cover in this talk? Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about to you is why self-worth as a manager is so very important, and the reasons behind that. And then I'm going to sort of ask you to ask, why should you listen to me? And I'll tell you a little bit about my backstory, how I got into management, and how I found out that self-worth was an absolutely critical part of understanding my and then finally, I'm just going to give you the 3 skills that you need to develop self-worth in your management. I don't know how many of you here are, but I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes now talking about why self-worth as a manager is so very important. We all know a strong sense of self-worth in the workplace can really affect your job performance in many ways. Self-worth enhances your trust in your abilities, your qualities, your judgment. Recognizing self-worth can increase your engagement, lead to higher productivity, for instance, and also improved relationships with co-workers. Employees who value their self-worth, they tend to experience better focus and can find work more fulfilling. Your own sense of self-worth helps you to trust your own judgment, not continuous self-evaluation, and therefore make better decisions, which are important leadership qualities that can help you advance in your career. Self-worth can also lend you the confidence to run meetings, support other team members, or have greater autonomy at work without the insecurity of trying to prove oneself. That self-preoccupation can be an incessant drive to be interesting, and we learn through self-worth that being interested in people leads to better results. It can also help you display the confidence necessary to impress an interviewer or to help you produce the best work, leading to bonuses and pay rises. And those things are important to remember. So what does this do? Well, it helps you to define your value. The first, you have to recognize what you work, assign value to your skills and expertise. That might include, as we've talked about a little bit, if you're not charging full value, because often we think to ourselves, oh, I'm not good enough to have this salary. I'm not good enough to charge this. Self-worth allows us to charge properly for our services, have confidence when we're interacting with co-workers, setting boundaries for how much work you take on, and to help eliminate stress and maximize the quality of the tasks you complete. It also helps you to identify your purpose. Consider the qualities you want to recognize in you, and then use these ideas to help create career goals, and then make a plan for achieving them. Your sense of self-worth will likely flourish if you feel you are actively working towards, and this is what we're talking about today, and achieving future goals. Use your self-worth to remember successes, taking time to think about what you've already achieved. And we were listening yesterday when we talked to people who are thinking about how to do journaling at the end of each day and writing down the things that they've achieved each day. Creating visual boards, digital files, or a list of successes that you can look at regularly. Kerry had a lovely picture that she had in the background when she was doing the talk, but she normally has that in her eye line. That brings her back to what her self-worth means to her. Keep report cards or diaries. Even if you don't achieve a major goal, write down the 3 accomplishments you make each workday. At the end of the week, you'll have 15 reminders of your self-worth. How about identifying your strengths and weaknesses? Considering the areas of strength and weakness and accepting them will help you build your self-worth. Ask yourself when you let if you let your best version of yourself, and when you felt you were growing, how does that affect you? Once you identify strengths, capabilities, you can achieve more in the workplace. And instead of thinking negatively about your weaknesses, you can make a plan to improve. Asking for feedback is really important. I always found it very difficult to ask for feedback, but I'm going to talk about how you can give positive feedback to somebody and increase their self-worth, and use that as constructive to build their skills. It also helps you to build great relationships. If you build your relationships on your own internal factors, cultivating positive relationships with your co-workers and supervisors can really boost your confidence. Build a profile of networking in your work will also increase your ability to improve in your career, but it also recognizes and helps you to recognize your value as an individual. And that leads you to taking on much more meaningful work by feeling engaged and doing important work as part of your identity. You can move beyond focusing on productivity to finding passion, and then using that challenge to reorganize and drive your daily tasks. And finally, focusing on yourself and focusing on solutions. This is really about considering your reactions to others by identifying how and when co-workers communicate with you, and considering when your reactions show your worth. You could work on responding to others in a way which shows that you value yourself by speaking confidently, maintaining good posture, instead of beginning your day with daily affirmations, as we talked about, so that you feel that you contribute to the world, and then using that to really focus on the solutions, the opportunities to improve, adopting mantras, remembering each morning to say, I am worth it and I am strong. Repeat that throughout the day to guide yourself through positive thoughts and recognition of your intrinsic value. Lindsay, I noticed a comment came up, but I wasn't able to read it as I was thinking. Can you, sure. Is there something we need to talk about?
It is, Anne is just mentioning that she became the manager of the team I once started in as a specialist. The supervisor I was reporting into suddenly became a direct report of mine. It took her a few weeks to adjust and understand that my role was now to develop her, build on her strengths and maximize them. So I believe it's all about building these relationships of trust and treating people with respect and have a lot of empathy. So I think very valid points.
I think that's a brilliant point, because so often, and I think we will come to this as I sort of talk you through the sort of the three skills, we forget that as a manager, certainly a manager with self-worth, our job is to be the support, build a team, because your success as a manager comes from having a successful team. It doesn't come from the success you yourself have. And I'll sort of talk about that a little bit during my story. I was just going to continue now and say, look, you may be sort of taking notes or whatever, but you will get the slides at the end of this if you bought the full menu, but also they're available on my website, which you can see there at selfworthmanagement.com, where I'll make that available so that you can read through these at your own time. So, okay, so why me? So what was my story? How did I get to come to this particular thing? This was obviously some time ago, as you can probably see, back in the day when I had more hair and I was considerably lighter, but that's another story. And as you can see, and as Lindsay said, I started out in the medical research field. I was at a relatively top university, and what you can see there is behind, very near to the head, that's sort of peeking into the side, is how we used to do DNA sequencing. I did a lot of virus research. I was sequencing DNA, and that's the way we used to do it. 30 years later, it's all done by machines, but at the time we used to do it with by hand. So it just shows how long ago this was. I was encouraged by my mother to go and find a real job. Unfortunately, I was never going to make it as a bench scientist. I was just not that good. I had lots of brilliant ideas. I couldn't actually make them go anywhere. And so I took on a job because one of the things I was doing in the evenings was looking after and trying to do better improvement to the hospital in which I was working. And what we ended up with is me writing to some universities and to some companies around the university. And one of them took me on, and my mother was overjoyed. She said, at long last, I'd found a real job. And I got into this job, and the first thing I thought to myself was, I want to be a manager. And so after a couple of years, I was headhunted, and I went to join this company, and I was given the title project manager, and I was so pleased. And within a few weeks, I hated the job because it was difficult, because I didn't understand what I was doing. I'd never been trained. I had no confidence to actually know whether or not I was doing the right thing. So I bumbled around. Now, it was as I was doing this that I began to sort of realize that some of the skills that I had as a scientist, I had to reapply. I had thought that as a scientist, the thing which I did, which was have a very structured process to do an experiment so that you could repeat that experiment, which is the basis of scientific research, that you do something in a very structured way so that it can be repeated by somebody else. I thought, hey, I don't need to do that anymore. In business, you don't have rules, you don't have structure and process. You go and do things, and you're entrepreneurial, and you just discover things. And I was so wrong. So I started to apply some of those things that I learned as a scientist back to my work job. And I would realize that if I did things the same way every day, I would get similar results. So I started to develop that. And in fact, it became a source of quite a success for me. Through this company that you've got on screen at the moment, I rose through the ranks and ended up in a very senior position, and then was headhunted and took into BT. And at BT, I was doing some fairly big things. So, and I was in charge of quite a number of people, but that actually led to complete burnout. I can remember I'd been flying around the world. I'd been working with the European Space Agency at the time. I was working with a number of other companies. I was trying to rescue things. I can remember waking up one morning in a hotel room, knowing that I was in a particular hotel chain, but I had no idea which city I was in. And so I thought, no, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to focus on doing what I really enjoyed, which was going back to where I was with the company before, this one, where I had developed people. I developed and understood a process, and I'm going to go back to that. And that's why my independent career started. So that's me, how I got to where I am. And I just want to sort of talk briefly about Ali. Ali was the first place. Sorry, I'm just noticing somebody from one of the questions here. My first manager created a safe place for me to learn and grow, ended up running the department when he left 25 years. We still kept in touch. Yeah, this is something I'm going to come on to actually, because this person I'm going to say to you, Cheryl, the person I'm going to talk about now, and I think you're absolutely right to pay forward to the teams you lead, because it's so important. And I'm just going to sort of talk now briefly about this quote that comes up here from Ali. Ali said, and once again, Ali is somebody that I am still in touch with. She said, without my help, I wouldn't be where I am today. I've learned so much about being a manager and a leader. Now, Ali was a very junior consultant when I first met her, but she'd always wanted to be a manager. So I gave her her first experience of being a manager. And I thought, well, I went through the baptism of fire. I think this will work. So I gave her the first experience she had of manager, and she had a horrendous experience. She sat one day and I found her sitting in her car outside the office, questioning if she could even bother to go on. So we sat and we worked through a process. I sort of thought, okay, go back to my scientific roots. We need a process. And so therefore we developed effectively a process of skills and things that she needed to do. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today. The next two consultants I took on this journey, Sarah and Rashid, did a whole lot better because they had a process and they developed the skills. By the time I left that company, I was managing about 120 through a team of about 12 team leaders. And I taught them to follow the same process. And so Ali, I'm going to go on and tell you, Ali now runs a company in her native Australia. She returned to native Australia. She's built that company. I was in touch with her a few days ago, asking her, is it okay for me to tell your story? She's now got 18 people working for her in that consultant. Sarah is now, I think she is heading up a department in a bank. Rashid is now the IT director of an insurance company. So, what they took from this experience, they've been able to apply, and they've done well. What I'm going to talk about most in this discussion comes from John's book, The Self-Worth Scenario, and it largely comes from that third terrain, which is all about career and work. At this time during a pandemic, too many managers, and particularly young managers in particular, are suffering without a framework and questioning their self-worth because they're working from home, and slashes in budgets to train them has left them with little or no opportunity to get those new skills. We see self-worth low in so many problems, leads to problems for managers and their teams. They are constantly looking for praise or validation from their seniors, and perfectionism, which they cannot deliver. Their teams can't deliver it, and they're micromanaging them, or they cannot or will not delegate. They don't take initiatives because they're afraid. They don't ask for what they need from their teams because they don't know what they're trying to do. Their teams suffer with frequent absences due to illness and depression. It's horrendous. They're oversensitive. People therefore don't take feedback because they don't know how to take it. And there's a constant need to talk in meetings because you're trying to be interesting. There's no way to deal with these changes. So what I'm going to describe are how we find self-worth at work rather than esteem and the desire to impress. What we're going to do is shift rather from being self-esteem and looking for defects and mistakes and being right. We're asking people to look for self-worth, where people look towards being their best friend to themselves. So in the self-worth safari, one of the most effective shifts within young managers is that thing to go from self-evaluation from usefulness, that shift forward. So I'm constantly encouraging the managers I'm working with to change their questions from what did you think of my presentation to which aspect of the presentation was most useful to you. Encourage people to go into a meeting with an attitude of usefulness rather than trying to be the most impressive person in the room, and then to support other people rather than to support your own growth. It comes to most of us at no surprise that the shift 6 from proving to valuing oneself, too often young managers feel the need to prove themselves in a new role. It's wrong. Your effectiveness as a manager is not from proving yourself, but making your team effective and valuing your team's contribution to the success of the organization. So let's just go and start talking about those skills which I worked with people like Ali and Rashid. So the first skill I taught them was how to give feedback. Now, this was a foundational skill. And the reason it's a foundational skill is because a lot of the rest of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is all about how you give and do the feedback. And it means that your manager has to move to that being useful. They should be trying to give feedback in a way which is useful, not for them, but to the person that they're talking to. It's the first skill as well, because it helps to drive the right behaviors that's required in a team. Let me give you a thought about this. I don't, and a lot of what we hear about in this week has been about the psychology of how we ourselves think. If you as a manager are trying to understand how somebody is thinking, you're probably going to get it wrong. I do not expect anybody to become an amateur psychologist. What you can do as a manager is look for the behaviors that somebody's exhibiting and ask the question, are those behaviors helping the team? So let's just talk about what we do as a manager then. What we do as a manager is we give feedback based upon the behavior that we see. And I do say that the first thing we have to do as we learn how to sort of give this feedback is ask the question of the person we're going to talk to, can I just give you some feedback for a moment? Because if they're in the wrong mindset, if they're not waiting to hear that feedback, if they're not ready to respond to it, it's going to be a waste of time and effort. So I often say to people, okay, start with just asking, can I give you some feedback? Don't make that feedback infrequent. Don't leave it to the annual appraisal and give 2.5 pages worth of feedback on something you've been doing. Do that feedback as close to when you see the behavior as you possibly can. I don't mean every 15 seconds when somebody's doing something. I mean sort of maybe once or possibly twice a day, just looking at what they're doing and asking them if they can do something. So let's just give you an example of what I'm talking about. Yeah, I always ask the question to begin with, can we do it? So it starts with something like this. Hey, I just noticed something. Can I talk to you about it? Or I just want to make a comment. Is that okay? Very light, nothing about it. Now, when introducing this skill, I often say to the people that I'm working with, don't start by starting criticism, because that's really easy. And the minute you start criticizing somebody, if they once again hear you're going to say to them, can I give you some feedback? The first thought they have is, oh, they're going to be critical. So the first thing I actually say is, you're going to be doing 2 types of feedback. You're going to be correcting feedback. Yeah, I need something different from you. But the other thing which is really valuable is to say to people, I really loved what you just did. Let's see more of it. So I always say, start with the latter. Begin with giving them positive feedback, because then when you say, can I give some feedback? They're not going to be thinking, oh, this is going to be horrible. They could be thinking, hey, this could be praise. I might like this. So always start when you're introducing this process by giving the very positive stuff and then moving to the slightly more corrective feedback afterwards. Anyway, back to feedback. Start by saying, can I give you some feedback? And the way I do it is something like, hey, I've just noticed something. Can I talk to you about it? Okay, yeah, no problem at all. When you came into that meeting and you were on time, that really helped the team. Thanks so much for that. Can you do more of that for me? And that's it. It took me, what, 15 seconds? And it could have a lasting effect for the rest of the day. For something correcting, I would sort of say something along the lines of, hey, can I just mention something I've just noticed? By coming into that meeting late, you stopped the flow, team was disrupted. I need you to do something about it. Can you do something about it for me? And you'd hope that you'd have a dialogue about, yeah, you're right, I was a bit late, I was a bit tardy, didn't get my act together, I'll be there on time next week. And that's it. That's feedback. That, using that feedback mechanism allows you to get through and move them forward. Amy, what do I think of the feedback sandwich approach? Do you know, I hate the feedback sandwich approach, Amy, and we could debate it. The reason I dislike it is because what I'm doing here is I'm just giving point feedback on something. If there's something that I see, which is the reason I think the feedback sandwich approach is there, is because people know that they're going to get a negative feedback. So they need to hear something positive first so that they get the negative out of the way. I'm going to deal with negative and positive. I'm going to make sure they get positive feedback. and I'm just going to give it at the time. So I kind of dislike the feedback sandwich, because for me, the feedback sandwich ends up being one of those things which is sort of masking the negative stuff in the middle, and people don't really hear it. So I'm just going to deal with it and just ask for change, and can they change, and then get them to sort of say how they're going to change. I can see a whole load of questions coming in, Alison. I can't, Lindsay, I can't really see them all. Is there anything we need to deal with now, or do you want me to move on?
No, sorry, no, it's just Anne mentioned as well that she always tries to give feedback about the performance rather than the performer.
Yes, yeah.
Particular point there. And Faye mentions that if you're dealing with typical computer scientists who have strong Asperger's traits, if you really give positive first, they get really confused when you then give negative. So she thinks sometimes it doesn't necessarily work with all types of people, as it were.
Good point. I spent a lot of time, because the company that I first joined, and BT obviously is filled with technical people. If you give them something in a way they're not expecting, they just are no longer listening. They're just tuned out, because they're sitting there going, I don't know what he's talking about. I'd actually prefer to get back to my spreadsheet now. And they just miss everything. So I just go back to saying to them, I just need this one change, and we focus on the one. And then if I think to myself, do you know, I need to deal with that, I'll deal with that tomorrow. Just make a note of it, and I'll deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments I need to deal with now, Lindsay? Shall I move on?
Move on. Thanks. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Second skill. Learn how to delegate. Now, this is so difficult for most of us. So I have seen most people can get. I can learn how to do feedback. Then you say to them, you need to delegate some of their work, and they look at you horrified, as if to say, no, my job is my job. I don't give it to anybody else. So, okay, so the way that I actually do this, once again, there's a process for this. I start off by saying to the manager I'm working with, hey, can I get your help with something? And you have to wait for the yes, because once again, if you start off and just blast into what it is, you've no idea whether or not that person's listening. You've no idea whether or not even thinking about what you're talking about. So, can I get some help with something? Yes. Okay, I need some help from you, and I need you to do it because I think you've got the skills and the necessary experience to do this. You give them the positive, then you give them the yes, you can help me with this. Then you tell them what you need to do. It's only after you've given them that sort of opportunity to say no, or to start possibly by turning around and saying, oh, I've got so much going on at the moment, oh, blah, 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 blah. You then get the, okay, I need you to do this. I know you can do it. This is what I need you to do. Now, this is the thing that I think most people fail on when it comes to delegation. You have a problem with just leaving that with most people. I very strong on this with the people I'm sort of coaching and mentoring through this. You then need to say, I need you to do it by this deadline. That's a fairly common management technique. But what I want you to do is check in with me by this time to see that you're on track. Why do I do that with them? Too often what we do is we give them a task and we say to them, oh, that's got to be done by the end of next week. It'll be fine. I never ever leave it until sort of the day or 2 days before and go, how are you getting on with that? And discover it's all over the place and we haven't got any time to correct it. I normally say something like, the first step is this. I need you to tell me by the end of today that you've done that, so that I can make sure that we're on track. And then we will set another deadline, maybe 1 or 2 days later, and go, by the end of that, I need you to check in with me to let me know that you've done that. Because at the end of that period, if there is a problem, you have time to step in and correct it. And this is where most people delegations go wrong. They delegate something and leave it alone and think, I'm no longer responsible for that. I can now just let that go. They're still responsible. They still have to make sure that what they're doing is going to meet the quality that they need it to meet. So I encourage people to have short little steps that say, you need to make sure that it's still on track. It's still your responsibility as the manager to make sure that's on track, even though you've now given the accountability for it to somebody else. And so many people just leave it and hope that it will be okay. It's still important. Now, this isn't micromanaging. This is just saying, when you get to the end of that, let me know about it. And the one thing that I keep saying to people is, just because somebody says I've done it, unless they've reported it, it's not done. There's another critical thing about all of this. Too many people will turn around and go, I did it. I don't need to tell anybody. It's done. It's not done until you've told somebody else you've done it. So that's kind of the step that we go through to learn how to delegate that work. And I think you're absolutely right there. Giving that is absolutely serving the person to make sure they understand that they've got to get it done. John, why is the reporting important? The reporting is important because it's still within one person's head at this stage, John. And if other people need to know about it, say as the manager, I need to be able to sort of assure my boss that something is happening. I want to know that if my boss asks me the question, how's that thing going on? I don't want to be in the situation of thinking I've no idea. So actually the reporting is important because you need to be able to make sure it's happening as the manager, but it's also about ensuring that you have the opportunity to review and making sure that it's going in the right direction. And something that, you know, I've talked to particularly managers who don't have self-worth, they're worried about this. Can I ask somebody to show me how they're doing it? Because what you're trying to do is be interested in their work. You're not there to criticize it. You're there to go and say, look, I'm interested in seeing how you're getting on. If there's something going wrong, I want to help. And that's really important to have in your mind. You're there to be useful. And we come back to, you know, the self-evaluation to usefulness. You're there as a manager to be useful to them. Third skill.
Sorry, Stuart, just before you go on,
sorry.
actually, so I have a question actually about the learning to delegate. Because what I often found was it wasn't so much that I was aware I needed to delegate, but I was also aware that the whole of my team was also extremely busy. So it was always actually finding how do you get that balance of being able to delegate when you actually know everyone doesn't really have the space and the capacity to take anything else on.
Yeah, let's give you a real world example. It might have been one of those people I told you about at the beginning when I was talking about Ali or Rashid. I can't remember. One of them came to me and said, when I said, can you do this for me? Yeah, it was Ali. I said to Ali one day, I need you to start doing this monthly report. She said, I haven't got time to do the monthly report. I'm like, okay, what are you up to at the moment? And we looked at everything she was going. And I went, well, I don't know why you're doing that. Let's just drop that and see what happens. And she went, no. Oh, that's really important. So-and-so has told me that's really important. So I said, well, let's just drop it and see. Because I don't think anybody needs that at the moment. And it's certainly something that we can leave for a while. So I just got it and I just said, look, just drop it. Just if anybody tells you and goes at you and says such and such needs to happen again, turn around and say, oh, Stuart told me to stop doing it because he asked me to do this, which was higher priority. Right. And if they've got a real problem with it, they can come and talk to me about it. But I said, just drop it. I think after 4 weeks, nothing had been mentioned. And she said to me, oh, you were right. Nobody's interested in that. And I thought, yeah, so much happens in big organizations and I've come across it loads of times, huge numbers of people are doing things that are just not necessary. They're doing them because they thought they were a good idea or because they've been doing them for a while and the world has moved on and people are still doing it. You have to ask yourself the question every day, is this one of the top 3 things I need to do? So we just in the process when somebody says that, I just turn around and say, okay, just drop that, see what happens. And if somebody says that's really important, we'll pick it back up again. We'll find something else to drop. And you just have to do a constant prioritization.
Great, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Brilliant, yeah, thank you.
Okay. The last skill, and you'll see there's a box that's sort of going to appear, which is not really a skill, but I'll talk about that later. The last skill you need to do is learn how to be a mentor. Now, this is really important and actually will feed back into the other 2 so carefully. So what do you need to do? You need to learn how to be a mentor. But being a mentor as a self-worth mentor is about is encouraging that self-discovery. And the way that I would mentor and talk to the managers that I talk to now about mentoring is you are the facilitator of their own skills discovery. So going back to that example that we were just doing, if I was going to say to somebody, I need you to take on a new particular part of your day, a new work, a new skill for me, and they were to sort of say, but I don't have the skills to do that, you go, okay, let's have a quick session of how we think about that, and then we'll find the skills that you need to do. So we would maybe have a quick brainstorm of find all the potential resources that you could use. It could be YouTube, it could be buying a book, it could be going and talking to another person. There could be a range of resources. And we'd go through and I would say, okay, think of all the resources that you can find in order to learn that new skill. Okay, you pick the first one that you want to work with. You go off and do that. And they might say, oh, okay, I'll go and buy John Nyland's book. Terrific. Okay, go and buy John Nyland's book. Going back to my it's not done until it's reported. Go and buy that book. When you've bought it, send me the receipt so I can see it's on order. And then when the receipt arrives, I go, that's terrific. See it's due for delivery tomorrow, because we're all buying things online nowadays. Can you read the first chapter by the end of the week and then send me a quick synopsis? And that way I know that they're on track. And once again, I am getting a report back that I can then use to build into my thinking about how we could go about delegating work to them, because their skill level is increasing. So there's a bunch of things where this skill enables me to be able to do that. But also, when giving feedback, I can say, I noticed you've got this behavior. I'd like to work on that with you. Can we deal with that when we're thinking about our mentoring? So we can use this skill to build the other two skills. Amy, yes, there are a lot of parallels to mentoring, to parenting. And I did find some of my children that I worked with were 2-year-olds, and I needed them to grow up very rapidly when they were in adult situations with senior managers. That's another story that I could get into for hours. So you can see how those 3 skills, I think, all sort of build on each other, and how they sort of support each other, and how important it is as a self-worth manager that you have those 3 skills. But the final one that I really want to sort of focus on is not really about a skill. It's about the only bit of process that I'm going to put into this, and that is having a structured meeting with the person. Now, whether or not that meeting, I liked to do it once a week. I don't insist on once a week. Some managers will turn around and say they don't have time for it once a week. I think it's important enough that you should clear your diary to make the structured meeting the important thing. But I would suggest that if you don't have time for this, you're probably not really doing your job. But this one is really about the shift of you as a manager from being interesting to interested. I used to talk to my managers, and I still talk to them now, about if they don't know the first name of the children of the people that they are working with, they cannot possibly understand the impact they are having. So you need to be interested enough in your people so that you know them intimately, and you know their families intimately. It is also about being useful. It's about going into that meeting, as I said before, me as a manager going in to be useful to that person. I am not there in order to give them a whole load of work and then walk away without thinking about it. My job is to go in and be useful and build their skills through mentoring and delegation, but also about being able to support them through what they need to do. So when having a meeting with them, I would often say the first bit of that meeting, that's over to the person that I'm working with. And I give them the time to speak to me about whatever they wanted. I give them the first half, and I ask them to sort of tell me anything they think they need to do. Now, that could be, and it did happen to me on several occasions, when you walk in and go, well, okay, how are things going this week? And you get, I'm going through a divorce. I can't cope. And if you hadn't heard those words, if you hadn't seen that was what was going on, the thing is, as a manager, you would be asking somebody to do something that they were never going to be able to focus on during that week anyway, because they've got too many other things going on. So by getting out of them the what do you need to do, or what is it you need to tell me, so that I, as a manager, can think about what is going on and being useful to you. That is how you can then, having heard what's going on, or having heard what the person wants to tell you, you can then move on to the second half of the meeting, which would normally be around, I've noticed a couple of things, or there are some things we're working on together. I want to sort of check on how that's going. And oh, and by the way, I'd like to sort of ask you to take on a new skill or new experience or something. But you couldn't possibly do that during the first half of the meeting, because you don't know what's going on in that person's life. And so that's why I always say the first part of that meeting has to be is their time. It's about them, and it's about you being useful to them. It's about you being interested in them. So that's how I would structure those meetings. So those are the, say, 3 skills and 1 tactic, 4 things that I think, as a manager with true self-worth, who's understanding the self-worth within yourself, but also building the self-worth within your team to make them successful. Those are the 4 key things that I take people through nowadays. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, you can go and find out more about all of this at my website, which is selfworthmanagement.com. Or you can also contact me through the Self-Worth Academy, and you can see there's my LinkedIn address, so that if you want to, you can look at some of the stuff that I do and I post online. Lindsay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I think there's just been a few comments. Certainly John learned how important it is to be advice seeking rather than advice giving, and genuinely so. So I think that's definitely very good, and not just as a technique. Anita has agreed, definitely knowing your employees. I definitely wholeheartedly agree with that. And Amy, it's important to have status reports from people that reports to them. Sorry, is it important to have status reports from people that reports to a manager?
I like the idea of a status report, Amy. I like the idea of a status report because it gives, I think it helps as a way to sort of sit down and structure thinking. I know, once again, going back to some of the people I mentioned, I had some really highly creative people and some very, very structured people. The highly creative ones would never write anything down, but you'd never ever be able to follow what was going on week to week. I like to get something from them that I could follow. So it would be great if they could give me a weekly report so that I could look back and go, well, it would appear that thing's disappeared off the radar. When did that happen? So it's useful to be able to do that, just from my point of view. And then whether or not you then use that as part of the weekly meeting you have with them, I think is down to individual manager's choice, really. I noticed there's one from Bess. What about what are your ambitions? Is that one of the questions you would ask, Bess? Is that yeah? No, I think it's important, because once again, we go back to that that's that sort of skills and delegation thing, isn't it? Because if you sort of ask what are the ambitions, you can find ways of delegating work which actually helps to work in with those ambitions, can't you? You can, if somebody turns around and says, I'm really keen on becoming a designer, you can go, okay, well, there's a task over here that needs some input from a designer. Let's find out how you can better become a designer, and then you can take on that task. So yeah, understanding somebody's ambitions can be hugely valuable in that respect. Not sure there are other questions I can answer. I could, as you could probably tell, I could talk about this all day. I probably will if I was given the chance. I'm really passionate about the fact that, for me, too many young managers have got so little guidance nowadays that they find themselves in situations that are they're out of their depth, and they do find that the job just doesn't live up to the expectations. So I just want to help them. I just want to move them forward. Thank you, Bess. I know. Bye-bye. She's just left us. Is there any other questions? Is it worth sort of unmuting and having a debate, or does anybody just want to move straight into a cup of coffee this early on a Saturday morning?
I think one thing to mention, Stuart, that everyone was very appreciative of the fact that you actually gave a lot of examples. So I think that was great. The fact that we had here we had the theory, but we also had a lot of the practice. And I think that was definitely something very thankful. And you'll be pleased to know at the very beginning, you were actually likened to George Clooney in ER. So there you go.
Yeah, no, it was a long time ago, that Lindsay. George and I have diverted since. Yeah, no, it was a great period of my life. I loved it. I really did enjoy it. And I genuinely thought that I didn't need any of the skills that I learned, and then discovered that actually they were a real bedrock to everything else I've done.
Okay, well, if it's okay with everyone, then I will suggest I'll stop the recording. And